What I'm saying is it's not actually related to your anecdote. Is it
okay? But
too
do you
broad?
have? But I asked the question.
And I'm saying that there are already mandated reporters on.
Right,
If this is actually an issue, they're already mandated to report on that.
You've been quiet this whole time. Don't filibuster on it now, right?
Like,
you filibuster all the time, Scott. Really?
They weren't saying, "Hey, kids," right? Like, "Hey, little boys and little girls," right? Have you ever thought you were a girl? Like, have you ever thought you were the opposite gender, right? Well, maybe you should really think about that. You know, maybe, are you positive? Are you positive you aren't? You are a boy, that you are a girl, right? Maybe you should rethink that. None of that was happening. There weren't trans kids. None of that shit was happening. Right?
So literally, just scroll through libs of TikTok, and you will see hundreds of fucking kindergarten.
Let's just trust cherry-picked worst case, like 10-second videos for an example.
Right, yeah.
So, they have the definition, but the burden of proof, the process of how you prove that it would cause harm, isn't actually supported, so teachers are not in a position of power to actually decide whether or not they talk to parents if they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, it seems like you took bullet points out of the bill. Read the bill.
I've read the entire bill. I guess you don't
understand how legislation works.
So Scott, do you ever go to anything besides insulting people's intelligence, or is that the only thing you do?
When they're just
knock off Mario Brother over here.
Currently, in both Florida and Texas, anti-LGBTQ reforms are being pushed. The Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and the anti-transitioning measure in Texas. Major corporations such as Apple, Disney, and Macy's have come out against these actions, sometimes under the pressure of protesters. Should companies be expected to take a stand on social issues, especially when those social issues have nothing to do with the core mission of the business? When a business takes a stand, quote unquote, how long should they be expected to follow through?
Generally, I expect businesses to be businesses. Like, so a lot of people like to crap on the idea of rainbow capitalism. I think it's nice when it happens, but basically for a business to do this, like, people are going to have to show that it's worth it for them to do something. It's one thing to have an opinion. It's another thing to have that opinion be strong enough that you're willing to, like, make financial decisions based around that opinion. Like, you feel so strongly enough that you, like, are willing to accept, like, make up for Disney, whatever profits they would lose, or all these other companies. So right now, it just seems like people are willing to say they care and they want the companies to do more, but not enough to actually put their, I guess, actual money where their mouth is.
Thank you. Scott.
Yeah, so, regarding the bills, I think it's pretty, fuck the Texas bill, but the Doesn't Say Gay bill in Florida, also known as the parental rights bill. I think, Disney came out for this. One individual kind of said in a boardroom that was supposedly leaked that they didn't want to say anything about it because they didn't feel that it was relevant, and then they wanted to keep their head down. And then social media pressure kind of forced them into rainbow capitalism, which I think we go beyond rainbow capitalism a little bit when the Twitter sphere is full of a bunch of lefties screeching and ringing because a company hasn't said something about something. It's very interesting to me because the way I normally see rainbow capitalism is the idea that you have a company that engages in advertising and marketing towards left-wing people that don't do research and aren't smart enough to realize that a company is a bad company. And then what they'll do is they'll give some donations to a charity that left-wing people like. And then they'll write that donation off on their taxes. So it doesn't matter to them. It's money they either had to pay to the government or pay to some fucking charity they don't care about. And then, all of a sudden everyone's like, yay, Nike and that Colin Kaepernick commercial. Wasn't that so great? No, but it is shocking that these white shoes don't have the blood from the children that are making on them. It's so fucking clean. And so, I think the entire thing is a bullshit fucking thing that corporations tend to do. And I think it's hilarious that lefties are so invested in rainbow capitalism and don't actually give a fuck about stopping large corporations or the state from doing anything evil. They just want to make sure that corporations tell them that they're the good guys on Twitter. And it's disgusting. And I really wish that the left would come back and start fighting for truth and justice like they were in the 90s. But instead, it's just a bunch of fucking sheep getting mad at each other on Twitter.
Okay. Once again, Scott just can't bring himself to tell us his real opinion on these things. He's awfully quiet. All right, that's okay, Scott. Maybe don't untie you'll come out of your shell. Thanks so much, Top Dolphin.
Yeah. Who cares? I guess if companies want to participate in rainbow capitalism, like I don't think any of the people who are getting the funding from this actually care. I think it's important that we show that this isn't like a substitute for like real political action, but like the charities that receive money from this, like the people who are happy that like their cause is being like spread, like get good feelings from it. It's not like a bad thing, unless people think this is like a substitute for real action. Also, the idea that fucking businesses like writing things off of their taxes is like a benefit for them is just like you don't understand how taxes work. That's all that is.
Okay, thank you. Lilac?
So I think that
You're awfully quiet.
Oh, sorry about that. I think that the framing of this question mischaracterizes Disney's involvement in other companies. I personally don't think that companies pretending to be good makes them good. I don't really give a shit if they do rainbow capitalism. They want to sell me shit. I get it. What I take issue with is active participation in political action to fund bills that actively harm myself and other people that I love. Like, that is completely reasonable and justifiable to take a stand against. That's not pushing Disney to do something. That's actually saying, hey, Disney, stop. Just slow down. Just keep making cartoons and go about your business. I don't care, but don't fund political bills. And then say, oh, I was forced to take action. Like, nobody asked you to do that.
Thank you. Stardust.
Yeah, I think companies shouldn't be expected to take a stand on issues necessarily. They can probably benefit from taking a stand on issues, but I don't think it should be necessary. And obviously there are going to be drawbacks. I agree with Lilac and what she's saying. They probably shouldn't, if they're not going to take a stand on something, they probably shouldn't be like funding specific political issues either. I think when it's a topic as important as like childhood well-being, companies taking a stand will most of the time always like be a good thing. And while it shouldn't be required, companies have a unique leveraging point. Because they can directly affect the flow of money in a much more direct way than like the average consumer could. It's basically the same thing as voting with your wallet. When the average citizen votes with their wallet, it's not going to have the same amount of effect as like a company would. Also, it probably would monetarily benefit the company. Consumers find that companies that stand up for popular social issues are more desirable, and they'll purchase products from those companies more. And stakeholders in that company may find that that's incentive enough alone, and they should probably do what's best for their company. And also, it affects the company culture as well, right? Like if you have people who are affected by a certain bill or affected by certain politics, I could certainly see a company getting involved because of the company culture. But should it be required? Probably not. Am I going to demonize a company for getting involved? No. It's in their best interest, and it's probably in the best interest of the people that they interact with. So.
The Duelist.
Probably a little bit in line with what everybody else has been saying. I think it's kind of really annoying and cringe that companies can come out and say certain things. Like if Pepsi comes out today and they say, we support the gays, then Coca-Cola kind of has to do the same thing. And it kind of like leaves it up in the air when one company says something and supports stuff and other things don't. And it's kind of, yeah, it's not great. But the big impact is when people get things wrong. And I think this is a great example of people getting things wrong, because I read the bill and everything that was in the bill on this example, and it seems like a pretty progressive bill. I don't know what was in there before, but
Don't Say Gay bill. Just want to be sure.
Yeah, the Don't Say Gay bill. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like 7 pages. It's not a very long thing. There's just one section on that. I mean, I could read it, but if other people haven't read it, then I'll argue with them afterwards. But I don't know. It seemed like a pretty progressive bill to me. I think sometimes companies react to social media outrage a little too quickly. There are lots of examples of people being a little bit too harsh with cancel culture from stuff that they've said 10, 20, 30 years ago. And it's a real shame that sometimes people have this much power.
So much. Lorna Box.
Okay, so I think the problem with Disney was that what it turned out that they it came out that the company had been donating to politicians who backed the bill, and then there was like a backlash, and then they kind of reversed their position. But I don't know, like corporations don't really care that like exclusively about politics. They might care a little bit, but the first thing they care about is money, and part of making money is taking popular positions and going with public pressure. I don't know how much it has to do with them bowing down to Twitter leftists. Twitter leftists that I know at least will uncritically hate every company and every CEO all the time. But yeah, it's not Twitter leftists that convince them to do this. It turns out that it looks like most Americans are against the Don't Say Gay bill. But yeah, I guess we can get into, as far as woke capitalism, I don't really give a fuck about what they do. I think it's maybe kind of cringe sometimes, but I suppose it's better than not doing it, I guess. But like, yeah, like, I mean, I'm not exactly gonna like give them my love for anything. As far as the two bills go, I don't know if we'll get into them, but they both seem pretty shit. So yeah, we'll maybe get into that too.
It's one bill. It's the one bill, and then the other one is like a measure that like basically like a letter from the governor, but
Okay.
still in action. Yeah. Let's go.
I need to pee again, sorry.
No problem. I mean, maybe a problem. I don't know. Doobie.
So firstly, calling the Florida bill the Don't Say Gay bill is headassery. The bill is fine. The fear-mongering and misinformation being spread about it by activists and quote-unquote journalists is, I think, more evidence that most people shouldn't be allowed to vote. Companies are in business to make money, not to push your favorite social wedge issues. Demanding that these businesses take some sort of action to hurt their profit margin, their employees, and their growth prospects, because you're upset that teachers won't be confusing kindergarteners about still up for the debate gender issues that even grown-ass nerds who come onto these panels struggle to understand. It just seems like entitled pearl clutching that we should ignore.
Doobie. My prince, my hero as always. Oh boy. Let's go to the open panel.
Okay,
please.
I'll be the dumb person who says that they like don't know, because maybe I only read articles. I didn't take the time to read the bill, and everything I'm saying about the bill, because I feel like other people should be smart enough to like summarize things. But every article I've seen related to the bill is states that like kindergarten through third grade, I think you can't mention anything regarding sexuality, sexual orientation.
I got it right here. A school district may not encourage classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students.
Yeah, I want to hear what
wait,
you
one
thought
second.
was progressive.
But
Wait,
what does- it's not saying-
wait, one
the
second,
whole
one
bill.
second. No, wait,
It's
let
not
me
saying-
respond, Scott, really quickly, because Prem,
Okay.
you just read a previous version of the bill,
Mhm.
right? The newer version, because
But I
there
missed
was that question too, like, what do you mean by discussion, right? So they specified lessons. A school can't have lessons about sexuality and gender identity from and also there's a question about what primary grade level meant, right? So they made it specific kindergarten to third grade. That's what they're talking about. Right.
What did they say?
Where's the progressive part?
Wait, hold on.
Can you
Wait.
send me the updated text?
Yeah, I will,
Because
I
I
will.
missed it apparently. I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. No, well, this is like the media malpractice I'm talking about, right? The misinformation. They make all these claims about it, but they don't fucking link the bill, right? It took me like half an hour to find the fucking thing. And then when I found it, I made the same mistake you did, Prem. I found a previous version, and then I had to find the newer version that had the updated language, right? So it doesn't say you can't mention sexuality or gender identity in the classroom. If the students are talking about this, it's totally fine. If the teacher responds to their questions about it, it's totally fine. They just can't have lesson plans or like curriculum surrounding this from kindergarten to third grade. That seems totally reasonable.
Got you, but I'm asking the duelist what he said. This is a progressive bill, means that it's advancing.
The bill
I'm
actually
asking what is
has-
advancing the conversation.
Sure. The bill has 7 points in it, And all of the other points, including this point, are basically just giving like parents a little bit more rights of what's happening to their children in school. So they go over if there's any changes in the child's like mental health or anything like this, that the parent should be informed. Schools are not allowed procedures in which they block informing the parents based on changes of like bullying or mental health or physical health or anything like this. Like this entire bill, all of the 7 points in it, other than this one point, is literally like, if the school knows something about the kid, they have an obligation to tell the parents about it, and they're not allowed to block that process in any way. And then the way that like I interpret this like this third one is not like, okay, we know all the lessons that people are going to have, like today we're going to learn about the gays and how good they are in society in this third point. I think it's more in a way of like it protects children from being given bad and misinformation based on sexuality at a very young age. And the young ages we're talking about here are 5 to 9 year olds as well.
I think what you just said sounded like I get what you're trying to say, but I feel like the other points sound like fodder. Like it sounds like just word filler to get in with the point they really want to get in. Because what is currently in place that says that like if your child was like having suicidal thoughts, that like the school wouldn't like have any obligation to tell the parents about it.
This is
Okay,
this
so-
is
so-
like
so
I
if-
can explain.
if,
I can
if
actually
you look at the
explain this.
7th point, it says like each school district shall adopt procedures for a parent to notify the principal or his or her designee regarding concerns under this paragraph, and then it goes out and lists a load of concerns. So they're literally laying foundation for procedures that schools and the districts need to follow. So
Okay, so no,
here's-
this we're a little bit off, but so it's not a progressive bill. It is absolutely a right-wing bill trying to get parental rights back. One of the big things that offset this from the right wing was the story, which is obviously a very much an isolated incident, which was a woman's daughter, January, was transitioned in school, right? And they kept all of the information about her being transitioned. Or he, I'm sorry, I can't remember enough about the story to remember which gender the child, I'll just use they, that they were transitioned from one gender to the other in the school. And the school had specific policies to make sure that the parents were unaware of the transitioning process at school. I don't mean hormone replacement or anything like that. I mean changing their name, changing what bathrooms they went to, making sure that their genders were changed and addressed, right? And the issue that this specific parent had was that they had a master's in counseling. They were someone who had practiced counseling before. Their daughter brought up these, their daughter, it was their daughter, so it would be they, right? They came to them and they had a friend group, and the parents believed it was in the best interest of the child that they not go through the transitioning process and that they not identify that child the way that that child wanted to be identified, but instead they were taking them to counseling, they were doing all these things. Now, there are a ton of schools before the implementation of this, right? That as we sit, that have policies drafted on making sure that parents are not informed that their children and the school administration and the guidance counselors are supporting their transition. And that is what this bill is specifically. That is why this bill upset the LGBT community, because they said that obviously the portion that is up for debate about, education K through 5 or K through 3 with the updated language is part of it as well. But the other portion was that they felt that these children might have issues with suicide, or that they may be bullied, or that like sometimes parents might disown them, and that there would be issues in that regard. Which of course the bill covered.
Here's the problem with the bill, the anecdote that you've shared about the bill. This bill is why children need constitutional rights, because the constitutional right to privacy is completely, there is no precedent for applying it to minors, and this shit is why. Here's the thing. Schools are already mandated reporters for issues of abuse, self-harm, situations where children are harming themselves or in danger. They're already mandated for that. Second, if constitutional rights were applied to children, this law would actually have to be narrowed in specifics. The specific issues that this bill actually deals with is related to the student's mental, emotional, physical health, or well-being. That is not narrowly tailored. Your anecdote that you shared, this bill doesn't discuss that. It is a blanket bill that lays out just anything that is related to the child, because if it's not mental and it's emotional or it's physical well-being, and then the teachers are not given the right, they're required, they're mandated to discuss that with the parents. That's not narrowly tailored. And what that means is this isn't going to be brought up in every single... Here, don't cut me off. What's going to be brought up is only the cases which further an agenda to tell parents about things that they specifically, that the teachers at their discretion want to tell parents. They're not going to be talking about just normal everyday kid issues because they don't have time to do that. That's not what this bill is going to be applied for. It's a bad bill, and I don't think it's going to hold up in court if it gets
Do you have any reason why you think teachers should be able to hide any of those things from parents?
What I'm saying is it's not actually related to your anecdote. Is it
okay? But
too
do you
broad?
have? But I asked the question.
And I'm saying that there are already mandated reporters on.
Right,
if this is actually an issue, they're already mandated to report
don't-
on that.
You've been quiet this whole time. Don't filibuster on it now, right?
Like,
do
accuse me of
You filibuster all the time, Scott. Really?
No, do you have...
Attack my argument, not the length of what I said, Mr. 2 paragraphs every time you open your mouth.
Okay, cool.
True.
I'll attack the argument. It's an insane idea that you think that that parents don't have rights over their children as the guardian
I said that
or the
children
custodian
deserve
of...
constitutional rights of privacy, not that parents don't have rights over their children.
Yeah,
Don't misrepresent what I'm saying.
Okay, but by doing so, you would get rid of the custodianship or the guardianship of the parent because you're not informing them. You're allowing the state agents, the teachers, to be able to keep secrets from their parents and do whatever it is that they want to do.
Are you arguing
children.
that the mandated reporting laws aren't sufficient to keep children safe? Because if that's the case, you need to amend the mandated reporting laws.
That's what this bill is doing.
No, it's a fully separate. It's a bill that is amending a different portion of law. This is not related to mandating reporting. It's creating a new set of standards. If you have issues with mandated reporting and you don't think it goes far enough, then you need to address that specifically.
Yeah, but this is
I think the bill is
involving
bad,
the parents.
I don't think the kids should have like rights to privacy. Like
I never.
Why like mandated reporting isn't enough because the agents of the state already have your fucking children and they're already doing things against parents' wills to your children. That's what this bill solves.
Do you support the public school?
Thank you, Brittany, for the raid. Very much appreciated.
Complete privacy from their parents.
I don't advocate for complete privacy.
Hold on.
I never said complete or unabridged privacy. I said a right to privacy that's elaborated at least in some form.
Do beat and learn a box.
I need to clarify something. So the portion of the bill that deals with them reporting mental health issues or whatever it is, right, to parents, that's K through 12, right? So that's not just kindergarten through third grade. The kindergarten through third grade thing is specifically instruction on gender identity and sexuality, right? But what I'm curious about is, so I can understand why there's a concern as to, let's say a transphobic or anti-gay parent being informed about, their kid being trans at school, right? Maybe showing up at school and doing their hair differently or whatever the fuck, right? And identifying as trans and requesting those pronouns or whatever. But I think the issue is that, first off, part of this bill is that in cases where teachers are concerned that abuse, neglect, any kind of harm to the child might be an issue from the parents, they are not required to report it to the parents. Yep. So if there's an indication that this parent might hurt this kid, right, might treat them badly if they find out, that they're struggling with their gender identity or whatever the fuck, the school actually doesn't need to report it. But
do they specify? Do they specify why they think like what you need to be to have your concerns about that to be reasonable, right? So what do you actually need to have like a plausible?
I forget the word they use.
To believe that the parents will be.
That's
what I'm not sure about.
It's in the statute 3901. If anyone wants to look it up.
Yeah, there's some other statute that they're looking to define that. I guess we can pull it up, but really quickly. But what I'm curious about is, if there's a child, right, and I'm going to call K through 12. I'm going to call them all children, obviously. So if there's a child, right, who's struggling with their gender identity, and at school they're identifying as trans or non-binary or whatever the fuck, and their parents aren't aware of this, right? Given that these things, right, being trans, being non-binary, being any of these things, has like a laundry list of potential mental health comorbidities, right? It seems like the parents are in the best position to help this kid. Right? Even if currently this kid does not for whatever reason feel comfortable talking to their parents about this issue they're having, that if they're identifying as trans at school, there's a pretty good chance they have some other mental health problems too that also need to be addressed, and the teachers hiding this from the parents is actually hurting the child, right? So it seems like, and even assuming that any kid who comes out, as trans or non-binary or whatever the fuck, or even gay, in like high school, middle school, is actually any of those things, is also a problem, right? Because the kind of gender affirming shit, is affirming that sexuality, can actually further push people into a phase that they're having and make them feel like this is who they actually are, and
What's
it's not
wrong
something
with
they're going
that?
to get over in a couple. Well, because again,
What's wrong with someone exploring their gender identity?
there's nothing wrong with that, right? But pushing somebody into that and in a way that makes them feel like this is actually what they are, and they're not just going through a phase, right? I think can maybe solidify that identity. And given that some of these identities are linked to tons of other mental health issues and suicidality and all this kind of shit, it's probably a negative thing to assume that all children who say they're trans are actually trans or whatever the.
Is there no way
we don't have
of
that. DB, please, no, sorry. We don't have this like basically like anywhere. So the thing with, if you look at like at the rate of children who even get referred for gender dysphoria, like I think it's like up to like 90% of them like don't even come back for like a second or third appointment. So the system actually does a pretty good job of making sure that it's like not transing people who are just confused. Like I think that's that wasn't like
I'm not
accusing
the mental health. I'm not accusing mental health professionals of like transing kids. I'm saying that if a kid is at school identifying as trans, right, and all their friends are saying they're trans, and their teachers are affirming that it's trans identity, right, and the parents aren't aware of this, I think that could be an issue because this child might be further pushed into this trans identity that isn't actually them.
But
Well, yeah, we
I
can
would
take
like
that, but
identities-
there's like a few things here. First of all, I don't think citing the credentials of the mother in that particular case was very helpful. Like Mrs. Littlejohn, because she basically she said that her child was suffering from rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is not a clinical term. Like it came from like a study that was exclusively
in the UK,
exclusively polled parents from anti-trans websites. So it's not a very useful.
Yeah, but this isn't like some random
mother,
uneducated anti-vax mom, right? This is someone that has graduate training in counseling. But
yeah,
regardless,
she's also a mother who is ignorant about trans identity. Clearly,
well, I mean,
like,
that's your opinion. That's your opinion. But
don't think
regardless,
parents have a right to policing their children's
completely
identities.
against medical consensus.
Okay, first of all, you could just as easily take the opposite opinion, right? So since you guys are so fucking, let's ignore the topic because I love to fucking white knight for the trans community. Like, let's go there anyways. So let's white knight for the trans community for a minute, right? Let's say you have two parents, right, that are religious but are open to the idea of their child being transgender. But because the child goes to the school and says, oh, my parents, they're religious, like don't tell them, yada, yada, yada. So now what you have is you have a religious family who the child is scared to open up to their parents and is having one identity confirmed at home, right? And is being forced to wear certain clothing, being forced to not be able to do certain things because the parents are unaware and because the child isn't experimenting in the home because they're afraid. And then at school, they have a totally separate identity. This can cause fucking problems. If we're going to have something that has comorbidities with all of these other fucking issues, like narcissistic personality disorder is a big comorbidity, cluster B personality disorders in general, suicidality, depression, and you can say, well, these are societal. They're not actually from being transgender. Well, can you imagine a more fucked up situation of societal pressure than having one identity at home that isn't affirmed and one identity at school because the school feels like they have the right to decide what we can do with your children while you're here and you don't have the right to know? It's fucking absurd, and it would hurt trans children.
If I can just,
I think the fact that you're okay.
I just. Well, you can go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you if you have stuff to say, Lunderbuck. So
it's just quick. I think the fact that you're saying, can you imagine what would happen if a kid had one identity at school and one at home, probably suggests you don't have the research to back that claim up. Because there is research that does back up the claim that even one supportive figure or one supportive environment is better than none. There's I can give you research from the Trevor Project in 2021.
Cool. That's the false equivalency.
Why are you cutting him off when he mentions research?
LGBT youth in affirming schools had nearly 40% lower odds of attempting suicide compared to youth in non-affirming schools, and that's regardless of what the parents are.
But you're comparing apples to oranges.
No,
you're comparing.
No, it's not true.
Yes, you don't
That's not true.
Apples.
No, you guys really. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Yeah, let him say it.
Undergrad.
It's okay
right?
to not
Can you
know.
make
real
an argument
simple.
instead of insulting people? That'd be
Well, I'm
aggressive at
trying.
this point.
I'm trying. Well, I've made tons of arguments that you haven't been able to contend with this entire debate. But
Oh,
anyways,
really? Okay.
again, right? What you're comparing is no supportive structure versus at least one supportive person. And what the example that I gave you was that there is an identity affirming structure at the school and one that is unaware at home, but is open to the ability of affirming their identity. And the school's policies are stopping this child from having their gender identity confirmed 24/7.
So, do you have any data that actually backs that up?
Sorry, please. So you didn't listen to what I said after one supportive figure, did you? I said youth in affirming. I said youth in affirming what?
Right, and then you said affirming schools or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, youth in affirming schools had nearly 40% lower odds of attempting suicide. That's in the school.
Right, but again, you're talking about in the school as compared, like you're not dealing with the analogy that I gave you.
You're making this analogy that you're saying this bill is worth it because this particular hypothetical might be really good, but you're ignoring the harm and the damage that will come from this bill, not just for trans children, but for any child that is in a situation that deals with their emotional, physical, any part of their lives. And also on the comment allowing for teachers to decide if they want to tell parents or not, this law doesn't actually elaborate what kind of protection they have and what grounds they're justified. Like, they have the definition, but the burden of proof, the process of how you prove that it would cause harm, isn't actually supported. So teachers are not in a position of power to actually decide whether or not they talk to parents if they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, it seems like you took bullet points out of the bill. Read the bill.
I've read the entire bill.
I guess you don't understand how legislation works.
So Scott, do you ever go to anything besides insulting people's intelligence, or is that the only thing that you do?
When they're just
knock off Mario Brother over here.
I'm actually
not.
My
argument is so bad, you can attack it.
I am. So I'm not
no,
trying to insult.
Me personally,
I'm not
but that's not my argument.
I didn't attack you personally.
You've only
read you did. Points. You only attack people personally, Scott. That's all you do.
Okay.
So what we're
discussing. Knock it off. Everyone, shut up. Knock it off. Let's stay focused on that. On the actual, not people's intelligence or the reading comprehensions. Let's try to stay focused, okay? Scott, I want you to reply. I do want to hear from Stardust, and then after that, I'd actually like to jump in and confront Doobie that way. Doobie for something.
Yeah,
Scott, go ahead.
I'll be real quick. I'm trying not to insult your intelligence and assume that you didn't read the whole bill. So what I'm saying is that this is how legislation works. It's almost always vague. And if you read the bill, you'll see that they have years, that school districts have years, not months, not days, years to be able to draft policy that fits with the bill. So when you're saying, hey, they don't have any of these things set up, that's not how most bills are written. Most bills are not specific around the way that a policy is. They have vague policy that says what it was that they want. And then the executive branch, the bureaucrats and the school districts and things like that, then create policies to specifically fit those things, right? That's just how legislation in America works. That's why it's not specific. And that's why if you read the bill, you'll see that they tell school administrations and counties that they need to draft policy to fit the bill.
Policy drafting, sorry.
Yeah, finish what you're going to say, then I'm going to go straight to Stardust.
Policy drafting does exist. I'm very familiar with the legislative process. I have worked as a journalistic intern at the Capitol to do this. I've seen the process. Okay, no, but here's the thing. Just because they say you should draft policy doesn't mean that they are narrow and specifically tailored in how they are instructing that policy to be drafted. Just because a policy will exist doesn't mean that it's going to be a good policy. You can't make assumptions about a policy that hasn't been written. So as this currently stands with the material we currently have, no, it is not specific about the ways teachers will be allowed to use their own discretion in allowing them to not disclose information.
Please, Stardust, and then I'm going to jump in and say something to David.
I just want to say that, it's either, saying that, oh, you must have not read this is still, kind of implying incompetence, if not unintelligence. But that's fine. Whatever. If you want to be condescending, that's totally fine. Outing somebody before they're ready can be traumatic in itself, right? A lot of the times you're talking about some hypothetical family that's going to be accepting of this child. And a lot of the time, people who come out to their parents are rudely awakened and find out that the parents they thought were going to accept them did not, right? Thirdly, I would rather have a child who at least gets their gender affirmed in one place rather than having that told to a parent and now not being able to have that affirmed in any place, right? At least they had it in the school, but now they don't even have that. And then fourthly, there has to be a way to maybe suggest that a child sees a therapist or sees a counselor without having to out them to their parents. I also have problems with trusting teachers to make this decision when to tell parents that they suspect a child may be transgender or may be gay or something like that, and be able to tell when a parent is going to be accepting of that. You're just not going to know, and I think it's better to leave that decision up to the individual who's going through that struggle. Sure, find a way to maybe suggest additional counseling for them, but it doesn't have to be through the way of outing them.
So I want to. Oh, Black, you have your hand up. Okay, I'll go to you next. Bam, if that's. I want and Lorna Box. Okay, I see your hand up as well. Doobie, I thank.
Yes,
first of all,
sir.
thank you for letting me know that I was looking at an old copy of the bill. So I much appreciate that. But I've read the whole thing. Right, I've gone through this thing. And it's section 3. And I'll read the language exactly, right? Classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Okay. You have implied, and maybe other people have implied that this makes sense, that this is just common sense. I mean, it doesn't seem so bad. Actually, I think it's pretty fucking terrible. So as it stands, of the final language, like, I don't see anything that is wrong with having a lesson plan where you tell kids that that some kids, right, like who think they're a boy one day, maybe one day think they're a girl. There's no problem with that, because kids actually start thinking about these things when they're young, right? Talking about these LGBTQ issues, and you can do it in an age-appropriate way, right? Like, this is the thing that they used to scare parents when we were trying to get gay marriage passed, right? It's like they're gonna have these lesson plans, and they're gonna read books to your kids about like boys kissing boys, and it's gonna be terrible. Your kid's mind is gonna break, right? Like, no, not a problem, right? Like that basically implying that there was going to be fucking gay porn. They're going to show porn to your kids or some shit like that. Like, this is exactly that kind of fear mongering. So I think that we can actually have those. We can have, and it's important to have those discussions at those ages, at age 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Because those kids are already thinking all those things. They don't know how to contextualize their own experiences, and that's exactly the thing that school should be doing. So no, I actually do have a problem with this bill as it is written currently.
Real quick. I can show you pictures if you want me to DM you later, Prime Case, things that are in school that break Twitch TOS. Just for the record, in case it's just fear mongering.
I was actually
that's
gonna
an interesting fetish, but go ahead, Doobie.
I was actually gonna mention something similar to what Scott said. So this idea that was all fear mongering, when there are many cases across this country over the years of parents finding books that have like graphic sex scenes in elementary schools, right? Is like recommended reading and shit in the libraries and shit. Not just gay sex, but like even straight sex, right? Kids finding parents finding like books about like sex toys and shit and BDSM in these like elementary schools, right? So it's not just fear mongering. That kind of shit has happened. Right? Whether or not you think it's a good thing, we can talk about it. I think it's a pretty bad.
Just a real quick quote, right, from Lawn Boy, right, which was one of the books that was like shocked a lot of parents. Like, one of the quotes from that book that was in the school library was, "I wrapped my 3rd grade fingers around his engorged salamander," and it was talking about a young boy jerking off a 35-year-old man.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I think.
So wait, no, I'm not. I wasn't.
Sorry, those aren't lesson plans, right? Right. That what your example isn't lesson.
No,
plan.
no, no. When you were talking about fear, yeah, no, I was just saying that stuff is there, but it's not.
Okay,
No, it's not part of the lesson
the fact
plan.
that
No.
I think we can agree that sometimes that out of the thousands of books that they have within a school library, that you could probably find something that is objectionable, right? That maybe we wouldn't agree on, but that's not this bill, right? I mean, this bill's more than that, at the very least.
Yeah. So
I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. So I'd like to respond. So, I don't know. I think that the idea that like 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds are prepared to like grapple with gender identity issues, right? And transness and sexuality just seems insane to me. I think just we can acknowledge that a lot of parents, even if you think that they might be ready for this, there are a lot of parents who are not ready for these kids to be exposed to this kind of stuff. And I think that topic specifically, right, sexuality, fucking dildos, whatever it is, right, is something that I think parents should have a say in when their kids are taught this. And I think after the 3rd grade, after they're 8 years old, is totally fucking reasonable. And is especially when this topic specifically gender identity, trans and sexuality, all these things is like so up in the air. There's so many debates about what any of this shit fucking means between like even activists, right, even allies of these groups, right? So the idea that you're gonna be able to teach this to kids in a way that they understand it, you're not gonna confuse the fuck out of them about their own gender identities, seems silly to me.
Oh, hold on. Again, so it'll be Bam next in the learner box. But it's we said age appropriate, right? So age appropriate for a 8-year-old, maximum age for this bill, doesn't mean dildo, right? So like there's like it's like a straw man that you're throwing out there. You don't have to defend it, right?
Hold on. According to who? We just told you there that some of these elementary schools have like fucking books where third graders are jerking off 35-year-old men.
Not a lesson plan. Again,
no
still
one's
different.
supporting that.
Still
but
not instruction. No one's again. That's a straw man.
Age appropriate according to who? You've had
exactly.
people.
What are the books related to this?
There's not like
How are they
educators who've done who worked out exactly this. In fact, we had a discussion about this many months ago about New York. In New York, there was a teacher who had the lesson plans that were showing to students, right? And I think you remember this, too, because I believe you were on that stream. Showing to students about sex and sexuality, right? And there was fear mongering all around, like what happened in that classroom, right? And people freaked out, but this woman knew her stuff and had multiple different lesson plans for each individual grade. And then at the oldest level, right, they did talk about like porn literacy, right? But like this is high school age kids, right? But like again, the fear mongering went out of control. So again, when we're talking a lesson plan that a teacher can actually speak and say, right? Then that one we can easily define. I swear we could come up with right now. We could do it right here. Age appropriate way of talking about. Hey, sometimes boys like other boys, right? Sometimes a girl feels like she's a boy, and that's okay, right? We could just do that right this second, and still have that. Something that is
but what you just said was transphobic though. A girl feels like she's a boy. This implies that she's not actually a boy, which is actually transphobic. So even in here, you're confusing yourself with this shit. Right. So again, the idea that you're gonna be able to teach this to children who I don't think are anywhere near ready to approach this subject. I think most adults aren't ready to approach this subject.
Nice try.
Bam. Oh, it was so good. He got your ass.
I feel like I don't know. I think it's like, well, I understand why when we're in these like online spaces, every time we see these things, we jump immediately to trans people. It's cool. But I'm decentering trans people for a second. I think cis kids, just kids in general, may wonder where babies come from. Like at 7, 8 years old, may wonder like I had my first crush. I had my first girlfriend at 5 years old, like play girlfriend, obviously. But like, children do have like, children of all like genders and sexualities have like these feelings that they don't necessarily understand from as early as 5 years old, 6 years old.
Are you gonna pull the kids are way more sexual than you guys think? Like, yeah, okay, so yeah, kids might be curious about what their dick does. We don't need to tell them what the dick does because there's a concern that they might go out and try to use it against each other, right?
Just because somebody is rejecting norms of gender also doesn't mean it's transphobic. There's nothing wrong with rejecting the norms of gender. There's
But this
nothing
thing
wrong
also
with
pushes
saying
back against
you may
the
be a
norms.
girl, but you know what? If you want to do boy things, that's fine too.
But I'm saying, why do we have to go that far? Why do we always have to go to trans people? I'm saying this bill also pushes back against like the just stereotypical gender norms we have now. Like it's saying that you can't talk about boys liking girls either. That's like also a part of sexuality.
Yeah, and I don't
Can I
think
ask you
that's
a
right.
question, Bam?
I don't think that's right.
Can I ask you a quick question, ma'am? I'm just curious. When talking about this bill, should I or should I not cancel my Disney Plus subscription?
How is that
I don't like
relevant?
I don't like it as a platform personally, but that's up to you.
Just curious.
Well, here's the
I mean,
other part of
everyone
this. Like,
should
no
cancel
one's
Disney
going
Plus
to
for other
be,
reasons.
no one's going to be bringing cases and bringing up this bill. If, like, my kid learned that boys and girls sometimes kiss. That's not what this is going to be used for. The practical effects of this will be primarily against the minority.
I get
think
that,
it's
but I'm saying that this is what it's just that this is the only thing we talk about the bill because we understand like we always jump to the edge cases, but like no one's addressing like the realities that this bill affects everyone, not just the
Right, and I think that's
agree.
bad,
I do
actually.
Yeah.
If I can
so hold on.
have a
Let's
moment.
get Loner Box has been waiting.
Okay.
Then Stardust. And actually, but Scott reminded me that we actually haven't touched like the core of the question, which is how companies react. Right?
Dude, I'm right wing. I just don't know if I should cancel my Disney Plus subscription or not. I never know.
Kids learn about these things in this day and age, like whether we like it or not. Like I first learned the concept.
You sound
of
quiet.
gay when
You
I was-
sound quiet. Is that just me?
Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
he's quiet.
How am I now?
You're good now. You're good.
A little bit better. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, people are going to learn about this stuff whether you like it or not. Like I first learned the concept of gay when I was 6 in like fucking Dubai, you know. And I really wish there was a teacher there with a lesson plan to tell me that being gay was cool because I probably would have been a better child, you know. Right? Yeah, but I think the other problem with this as well is like you keep on like trying to wedge in this whole thing about like, oh, look at this textbooks with dildos. Like it's not about that. It's about lesson plans that are age appropriate as well that wouldn't be allowed. And I'm like, okay, maybe you think it's going to be confusing for them. I don't see the evidence for that. Like when it comes to the question about the one that really bothers me is that they say that you're allowed to hold it from the parents if a prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse or something like that. That just seems kind of vague for me because like in where I come from, like the guidelines that we went by when I was teaching was basically that if a child tells you they're trans, you can like change their gender and all that if like socially if you want to and or if they want to. But the problem was that you should encourage them to get parents involved, but if they don't want you to, that's enough of a reason to hold off and try and put it to later. Because if a child says, I don't want my mom or dad to know that I'm trans, like, it's not worth the risk because there is so much danger involved in outing a child to their parents. Like, the risks of, like, everything bad goes up, like, just in case that parent is, like, not keen on trans people. Like, I think, like there was a study from Toronto that showed, like, half of kids with, like, non-supportive parents had housing issues, like, under the age of 18. So that's the kind of thing. Like I don't have time to look into 39.1. It's really long. But how does everyone feel about that? Like, would that be enough? Like, if a child says no, I don't want my parents knowing. Like, does the teachers have to tell them anyway if that's all they have?
I was curious about that. Would you want
why they don't want to tell their parents? And if they say because I don't know if my parents are going to be positive about it, or I do know that my parents aren't accepting of different sexualities or genders, then it would be enough. But if they're just like, I just kind of only want to be trans at school, I don't think that's a good enough reason.
The kind of like guideline that we're given
expectation.
here is that, just really quick. One of the things that we're given here is that, like, kids sometimes don't really want to speak like that ill of their parents either. So I think just like the hesitancy, you can try if they're hesitant to tell you why they don't want the parents to know. That's scary as well. You know, some kids don't want to know that their dad's an abuser and shit. So yeah, I think if the kid doesn't want their parents to know, that should be enough because the risk of outing a kid in that situation is just too high. It's not worth it.
No kid's
So-
going to tell you that.
I have
No
two
kid's
things
going
on-
to tell you that they're like, I mean, most people in those abusive situations are not going to come out and say like, yeah, you know, my dad's going to beat me with a belt like when he finds out about this, right? Like that's not
but
gonna...
I think
So I have two things on what Lonerbox was saying, and one is prudent person is going to be determined by a judge if this ever became to court. And when you can count on the judge probably assuming prudent means conservative, heterosexual, not accepting of trans rights, then prudent prudent person becomes.
Hey, Destiny, thank you for the raid. So much appreciated. Thank you.
Whenever we're going to have a discussion
Have you found
about
that's not an
children
argument,
being able to articulate why they don't want their parents to be involved, we have like particular laws for minors for a reason. It's because they don't have the same skills and abilities as adults. And if we're going to hold that as true, then we can't expect them to have the same skills and abilities as adults to articulate. It's kind of like what Stardust was saying, that they can't say, oh, my dad's going to beat me, or that they're not accepting of these things. They may just know, I'm afraid. And I also would argue that if you are in a place where the majority of people, it's a coin flip whether or not they're going to be accepting of a trans child, then I don't think that you could argue and a truly prudent person would tell anybody's parents, because you just can't know what's going on at home.
Would you?
I don't think we're relying on the.
I want to add one thing. Like, it's the. I agree with what you're saying, Lilac. A lot of the times, even, and I want to reiterate that a lot of the times, a lot of children will come out to their parents thinking, I live in a progressive household. Of course, they will be accepting. But that initial moment where they come out is actually incredibly painful. Parents don't know how to react the first time. And to have that forced on the child before they're ready to deal with those repercussions is going to be very traumatic. Secondly, if we're talking just about sex education in general, if this is a bill that is prohibiting sex education, I don't think that's a good idea, because I think the earlier you start sex education, the more likely you are at preventing sexual abuse, right? You have to know what sexual abuse is to be able to prevent it. Plenty of children grow up being sexually abused, and they don't know that they're being sexually abused. They know that something doesn't feel quite right, but they don't know that they are being abused. And so people there's a way to communicate to children in an age-appropriate way, to tell them when somebody is violating your boundaries, it's not right, and you should have control of your own body. This is a fundamental concept that a lot of children don't even grow up learning, right? They don't learn that their bodies are their own, and that nobody has the right to violate that. So I don't think
I'm glad you agree with the bill. I'm glad you agree with the bill, because all that's in the bill.
I think I'm like literally at the point of a coin flip. Just a quick question: is there? And this is a legit question. This isn't like a gotcha. Is there any other anything other than like an LGBT issue where we would apply the same logic to, of like, oh, don't tell the parent?
For example, if they are prohibited from even talking about same-sex relationships.
Answer my question. That feels like.
Well, wait a minute. This is going back to the abuse situation. All right. If somebody is being abused, it is not always heterosexual, right? It sometimes can be, and it's somebody that they trust, and it can be same-sex as well. That is why, and this is not anything against any community. This is just talking in general. Abuse happens. Sexual abuse happens. It's it's not always going to be covered by what is typically what you would say like is heterosexual, right? So it needs to be addressed.
That's in the bill.
It's not.
It's saying that you can't talk about sexual identities and that everything must be age appropriate. There's nothing in the bill that stops a kindergarten teacher from saying like, hey guys, these are no places. People aren't supposed to touch you here. And if an adult touches you in your no place, like you really should tell somebody. Like there's nothing in the bill that stops that.
I want to legit answer the question before we dive by it though.
Lesson plan just says it needs to be developmentally appropriate. There's nothing developmentally inappropriate about teaching children boundaries around certain parts of their body.
Doobie. And then
I wonder why the wording.
Wait, can somebody answer my question?
In my answer,
any other time when you wouldn't tell the parents?
Probably that it's exactly the same for other things as it would be for gender and sexuality for me.
I can't think of any one thing that we wouldn't tell. Like that, you would say like, oh, okay, it's not okay to tell the parents. Like I can't.
No.
That's
I'm
literally I'm saying that's my determining. I'm saying there has to be something else that we would apply this to.
It's anything that would cause abuse and harassment. Anything that would cause abuse and harassment, right? So if you think that the
Like if a
this
child was
would
cutting
cause-
himself, I feel like there's no way on earth we
would
wouldn't tell the parents.
would a reasonable person think that telling a parent that their child is cutting themselves cause abuse and harassment at home? Right, that's what you're asking for, right?
Possibly, but that's in the bill.
That's in the bill,
So hold on, but he's just asking me a question, so I'm just trying to answer that question, right? Anything, abuse or harassment that would reasonably cause the parent is going to do this to me, right? Like, or maybe like I've changed my fucking religion, right? Like I was a Christian, now I'm a Muslim, and if I tell my parents this, they're going to throw me out, or I don't believe anymore, right?
That was a good example. Okay.
Yeah. So okay,
I agree.
Doobie and then Lorna Box.
That's a good example, yeah.
Yeah. So to be clear, what abuse means or neglect means is laid out. It's very specifically, right? It points to another statute that exists. I can post that statute for you guys. It's very specific, right? But I think that going back to what Lilac and Lona Box were saying, I think relying on the judgment of a child who is already struggling with their gender identity, which is an indication that they might have other mental health issues in addition to the problems that come with being a child and their judgment just from being like a child and not having a fully developed brain. I think relying on their judgment, solely without any like other input, is a bad idea, right? I think we shouldn't just say, hey, if the kid says no, for whatever fucking reason, we're just not going to tell the parents. I think you need more than that.
I just
What
want
do
to
you need?
state
Do you
that
need
I
to, like,
didn't
sleep in the
advocate for
parents'
relying on the
houses, you know?
child. Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that I didn't advocate for relying on the child's judgment. I think even if the child says tell my parents, if the child wants to tell their parents, they live with them. I assume in this hypothetical, like the child can tell them. The school, like if the parents are safe to tell, the child will tell them. If they're not safe to tell, the school shouldn't get involved. So in either case, the school doesn't need to be relying on the judgment of the child because it shouldn't be saying anything.
Or maybe they're afraid to tell the parents on their own, so they'd like a counselor or someone there with them when they tell the parent. Right?
If they're afraid to tell their parents, there's probably good reason, or they have people who actually know their parents, like friends of their family, aunts, uncles. There are people who are more in touch with the situation than people that may have met their parents at parent-teacher conferences, maybe.
Even
That sounds like children have
even if
anxiety.
you know that your family are going to be supportive and all of these things, right? And you know, like 100% coming out to your family and stuff is still a difficult process for a lot of people because it makes it a lot more real than it was before.
And having that forced on you is also, like, again, agreeing with Stardust, having that forced on you before you're ready, even if your parents are supportive, that is traumatic. Because it's what it's saying is that you don't get to have ideas and opinions about yourself as a person that are yours. And that's not, I don't think that that's a message we should be giving to people, because that's not going to raise people who have actual strong self-identity. That's going to raise people that constantly feel like they need to be protective and try not to expose anything about themselves, lest somebody else take it upon themselves to inform people around them.
Yeah, but I think
the
issue specifically with trans people. I don't think this is the case for like gay people, for example, but I think specifically for trans people, or people who might be struggling with their gender identity, non-binary people, whatever you want to call them, right? For this group of people, because there's like a comorbidity with other mental health issues, and it's like a massive comorbidity. Right?
I haven't seen your data for that, but I'll run
sure, I can pull it up for you in a bit. But so that being the case, right? That's just a reality, right? If we want to talk about why that is, we can talk about that, but that is just what it is right now. So
allegedly,
that being the case, right? The fact that I'm sure teachers are gonna be aware of this if they're educated on gender issues, right? Not telling the parent that your children is struggling with transition, struggling with their gender identity, when that could be an indication of a ton of other very serious mental health issues that this child needs help for. I think is fucking terrible.
See, here's where you're going though. Okay, what you've alleged is that they have these comorbidities for these very severe mental health disorders. If the parents are so checked out, if that's the case, if that's actually true, I don't know that it is, but if that's true, then a child who's struggling with a cluster B personality type disorder, which by the way, you shouldn't be diagnosing people under the age of 18 with cluster B personality type disorders, because teenagehood, childhood very closely mimics a lot of those same symptoms. But if that's the case, somehow, if the parent can't tell that from interacting with their own child, I don't think that they're going to be a very good or helpful advocate for them to understand their own gender identity if you're alleging that they need the parent's help for that.
Lilac,
I think I want to hear from one box. Been waiting.
Yeah, I think the problem was like the way we do it, like again, like the way we do it here, and why I'm like just like not too happy with this answer, but like telling the child's parents is that like, what else do you have to go on? Like, so as far as we know here, like, I don't see what's wrong with the idea of you're encouraged to get the parents involved as soon as possible, but you should be very hesitant, like, if the kid says no. Like, and if the kid doesn't want to tell you why no, then I think that should be enough for you to think, okay, I'm going to try and bring this back up in a week or two and, like, find out, because that alone it's quite dangerous. And there's lots of other examples. If a child's being bullied, they might not want their dad to know because their dad will be like, you're not a real manager. There's lots of kind of ways this can happen.
The problem. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
One more thing. Maybe I'm just being an idiot, like I can't read. But 3, I don't understand what this means. But like it says, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3. Then or in a manner that is not age appropriate. So why are they contrasting like can't be taught in kindergarten through grade 3? Or in a manner that's not age appropriate.
So I think
like
it's you can't.
This means that there's a blanket ban on kindergarten through age 3, and then for K through 12, it has to be age appropriate. Is that
actually what it means? Because that's pretty bad. That's the fact that it's a blanket ban means you can't go to a 5-year-old and have a plan that's like, some boys like to hold hands with boys like that.
No, there's a
Kind
lesson.
of
we're talking
about,
right? Yeah, that's the idea. Is that
your
people
example
don't want
right
your
there is
5-year-old.
do it.
Yeah. That's like
You
pretty
should have a
serious.
lesson
5-year-olds should
for
know
5-year-olds
about
about. Again, Stardust. That's not.
5-year-olds learn about straight relationships.
Why doesn't abuse
all the time,
matter?
right? Yeah, because 5-year-olds learn about straight relationships by default, right? I don't know why you wouldn't introduce them to gay ones as well.
Because you're talking about sexual identity and sexual relationships, right? You're saying, well, okay, through osmosis.
Hold on a second. You're not allowed to do it for straight relationships either.
Right.
Which was what I pointed out being an issue.
But that's no bullshit.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not allowed to do it for straight. Of course you are. Of course
you're not.
Because listen to me.
Pulling shit out of your ass. You're a magician now.
No, Scott. This is what you're doing, and this is what the Duelist is doing, right? Lala pointed out a long time ago, right, that our society accepts the straight identity, right? And talking about the world and experiencing the world through a straight lens, so a heterosexual lens. And so so you can talk about these things, right? Like you could say that technically, well, yeah, I guess this applies to all, but how will it be enforced? It will be enforced exclusively if we're talking about homosexual relationships, right? So
that's a lie. Prime Kids, you're lying.
You can have
Prime Kids, you're lying.
About, hey,
wait.
I've noticed that some of you have like boyfriend and girlfriends, right? Maybe you should just hold hands or something. I don't know. Maybe you should slow down and
the bill doesn't ban that for gays.
Yeah, you
people
could say
either.
That.
You can't have a lesson
plan. If you have a lesson plan based around sexual orientation, that kind of the discourse, right?
You can't do that for straight people either. This
no,
also
I'm
bans
saying that you absolutely will be. Like that's how this works.
It's about the application.
Yes, the application, exactly that, right?
It's about lesson plans. You're not allowed.
Yes, I know it's about lesson plans. I don't know what you're saying. That I've already said that. I said a lesson plan
because you're not getting it.
Got that? No, because that's how. Okay. How are things enforced, right? This is systemic racism all over again, right? Well, the law doesn't say, right, like that the police should beat up black people, right? So obviously there's no systemic racism, and the justice system, obviously, right? No, it doesn't have to say. It doesn't have to say.
That's such a code.
What if a teacher just doesn't like a kid?
Gay individuals. Doesn't say don't talk about trans individuals, right? Doesn't have to say any of that. But and you could say just generally just keep these things out of the classroom.
But you guys are spinning a narrative that is completely untrue.
If you actually analyze what people talk about, right? You find things that would go over the line, but they wouldn't be challenged because we have a heterosexual perspective. That's by default.
You're literally doing
lesson
the
plans
theory to become like the Jordan Peterson of the left, talking about how you're doing the same article, whatever it was that Jordan Peterson attacked in Canada.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Was it not K through third grade that it's completely prohibited?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're telling me? Wait, what did you say?
Lesson plan.
It's instruction, like lesson plans about these things.
Okay, so then you're confirming that people K through third grade can't learn about boundaries to me.
No,
No.
you just didn't read the bill and you don't understand
It's
what everyone's
sexual
explaining it to you.
relations, right? Is it
No,
not?
it's boundaries is
I feel
not
like you're
sexual
just not- I feel like
relations.
you're
Yes,
just
it
Don't touch
is. If
someone's
you're
no
talking
life.
about abuse, yes, it is.
You are literally making
sexual
shit up.
relations isn't in
Wait.
the bill. It's
Like,
sexual
you guys-
orientation.
It's sexual
and
identity and sexual orientation.
Well, that's what I'm really
Or,
like
sorry,
frustrated about, because you're saying you're against like the lesson plans for sexual identity because they're 5 years old. Like, okay, like we get default sexual identity plans. Like I remember being fucking 4 years old and watching Nala bite Simba's ear and then they fucking shit. Like, okay, we show fucking sex education videos of people shagging at the age of 10. It doesn't result in all the kids going around and ramming each other behind the bike sheds. It's like, it's just,
But Loner
again,
Bucks,
like,
that's the
being
whole
gay-
point of the
But if you
name of
want-
this bill.
I
The
think
name of this bill is parental rights and education. It's not saying children shouldn't have these things. What it's saying is we don't trust the public education system to be teaching our second graders about sexual identity or about any of these other things. It is your responsibility as a parent to bring up certain things. What is really coming down to is Lilac talks about this multiple times where we're talking about from a perspective of a conservative, right? Since apparently the duelist and I might be the only ones here, and Doobie kind of just is whichever way the wind blows, right? From a perspective of a conservative, this is about rights, and this is about the fact that you have rights as a custodian or guardian of your children who are not developmentally able to express their will. Right. And so the default position that you are taking by saying that this bill is bad is that the state has a right to regard that they have a right to determine what the will is, the expressed will, the consent, and all these things of your children better than the parents do. And conservatives are saying, fuck you, I'm a parent. Don't be doing shit to my kid without me knowing.
I'll bite
But
that
it's not
bullet. I think
doing
that's
shit to
that's
the
actually
kid.
abuse. I think like there's certain aspects of society that like everyone needs to have a base level knowledge about. Like I think parents being able to opt out of like teaching their kids about the different types of sexuality is like almost not even necessarily because their kid's going to end up LGBT, but just like because they're at some point they're probably going to have to deal with these people, and saying that you can opt out of that, I think that like that may be a form of like child abuse, because I think you're not preparing them to deal with the very real world they're going to step into just because you as a parent want to like build up this shelter.
Let's go to Top Dolphin and then Doobie. Top Dolphin, Doobie.
Yeah. So an issue I have with some of the arguments that we made is that you're saying that like a lot of times that like parents that kids by default have like a view of the world that like sort of educates them, like society kind of educates kids on like heterosexual relationships even as early as like K-3. While I would be against this bill because I think we should have sex ed starting at kindergarten and like it should scale up, I don't think we necessarily teach in schools about like straight sexual orientation. It might be, we might talk about things that are taught by society, but I think what the bill would be like, the argument for the bill would be like straight relationships and gay relationships should be left to society until you're 3 years old, and then in third grade, which would be like 8 years old, and then we can start having those conversations in school. I don't like that idea. I think that like introducing this to kids as young as possible is probably good, as long as it's done in an age appropriate manner. I don't know why it has to be age appropriate at third grade and above, but not beforehand. But definitely, I don't think we teach children in school like this is how like straight relationships work or anything like that. I think it's like society teaches them by default and it's reinforced in schools, which would be like different.
I also think just like the thing. Sorry.
Yeah. So first to respond to kind of, I just add to what Top Dolphin was saying. So it is true that culturally, kids do kind of get this by default education about like cis het norms or whatever the fuck you want to call them, right? But there's currently like a massive overcorrection happening where they can watch The Lion King and see Nala and.
I'm gonna have a fucking stroke, guys. I'm gonna have a fucking stroke. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Am I losing my mind?
Right, they can watch Cruella, see another gay character there. The New Beauty and the Beast, another gay character there. Right, the Onward, another gay character there. Right, when it's like fuck, like 4% of the population is gay, but you see they're everywhere in media. Right, so there's already currently a massive overcorrection happening on that end. They're gonna be exposed to this if their parents choose to let them watch these movies, just as they'd be exposed to lion sex in The Lion King. Okay. Secondly, Prime. So when there was all that hubbub, right, about the books in the libraries at elementary schools and shit, and what this teacher in New York might be teaching these children, a lot of the what people were upset about wasn't just the gay sex and transness. It was about heterosexual sex. It was about the idea that teachers were teaching their young children about blowjobs and about eating out women and shit like that, right? And that this was in the books and this was in the classroom and yada yada yada, right? So I don't think there's any indication that parents are suddenly okay with it when their 8-year-olds are like talking about straight sex.
So let's be honest, right? Let's not try to fearmonger, and let's actually find sources. Were they teaching 6-year-olds about blowjobs? Was that what was happening?
No, I said
no.
A lot of what they were upset
that.
about was the idea that this was happening.
The idea, right? I know the
yes.
idea. Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Wait. Listen. So just as they were fear-mongering back then about straight sex and gay sex, you're currently fear-mongering about the evil cis-hets who want to oppress the trans people, right?
No
Okay.
one's saying you can't educate about.
We're suddenly going to be okay with it when their kids are learning about like straight sex when that's never been the case in any of these situations.
No. They weren't doing it, and they weren't doing it before. They're not doing it now, right? Like this is a bill born out of that fear you're talking about. Yes, that's true. It's born out of that fear, but how it'll be used is to squash anything. And I mean, the bill says so. Anything talking about sexual orientation or gender identity, right? We can't have a lesson. We can't have a structured discussion about this. Expand kids' minds, like what you would do in school. Introduce them to these topics that, as Bam correctly pointed out, you are going to have to deal with, right? As a functioning human being, you're going to have to deal with this. So we can't actually do these things because of that fear you're talking about. When they weren't talking about like a blowjobs, right? They weren't talking about like anal sex, like sodomizing people. They weren't saying, "Hey kids," right? Like, "Hey little boys and little girls," right? Have you ever thought you were a girl? Like, have you ever thought you were the opposite gender, right? Well, maybe you should really think about that. Maybe, are you positive? Are you positive you aren't? You are a boy, that you are a girl, right? Maybe you should rethink that. None of that was happening. There weren't trans kids. None of that shit was happening. Right?
So literally just scroll through libs of TikTok and you will see hundreds of fucking kindergarten.
Let's just trust cherry-picked worst case, 10-second videos for an example.
Right, yeah. So, okay, yeah, whatever.
I'm gonna say all of
they
them.
might not be doing it, but they're certainly bragging about it.
10-second videos on TikTok.
I really don't believe any of it. I don't
one.
believe a perspective on that. Not at all, right? I'd actually have to have proof that there are actually instructions
these memes,
they're trying to trans the kids, right?
So like, yeah,
but if it did, you would disagree with it,
Look at these memes I found. They're killing us.
But like I say, it's unfounded. It's ridiculous. We should bend to it, and we are actively hurting our kids if we can't have the discussions in real life. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I think the important part of that is like we don't have to push back against each other's like bad straw mans about like I said dildos and trying to trans the kids, because if like even if those are happening, like because I think it's weird, it's bad to say like it's not happening, but if it is happening, then I think it would be bad. So that's not like no one here would.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that. Some people on this panel think it would be bad if they're teaching first graders about dildos and shit. It's like, hey, are you really sure you're a boy? Are you really sure you're a girl? Hey, your friend over there, he thinks he's a boy, but next year he might think it's a girl, and that's okay. Little boy, it's okay if next year you think you're a girl.
Now, some people
here's the thing. I don't think things like dildos have any place in the school. Okay, what I think is okay is saying, wait a minute, just rejecting like, hey, you don't have to fit into all of these stereotypes. That's fine. That's not saying anything about your identity, right? That's just saying be a kid.
Hey, real quick question. Who here has kids?
Oh, boy.
Who here has children?
Well, I mean...
Is it just me?
I've kidnapped a few.
Children.
Yeah, appeal to authority.
I'm just curious. I'm just curious if any of you
Every
had
single
these, like,
time
crazy
one of these
young-
conversations
That's
happens, who here has kids? Who has kids?
Like,
should I police every dude who talks about abortion now? Who here has a vagina? Who here has a vagina? You can't talk about this unless you have a vagina.
Black everything on purpose, right? Where white people aren't allowed because
Check us out Thursdays.
right? All right.
You
All
know,
black everything on Thursdays. You should check it out. But all I'm saying is I'm the only one here with fucking kids. And it's kind of fucking interesting that all you people don't give a fuck about parental rights. It's real fucking interesting.
I think you're just a
wait.
You think
conservative.
you're a representative
Doobie
sample of
doesn't
the
have
parents,
sex with
Scott.
condoms. He probably has kids somewhere. All right, so put
None that I'm
out
aware
there.
of currently. Okay?
Hold on a
All
box.
right. Point still stands.
Scott, you'll forgive me if I think your sample size of 1 is a bit low, but
I'm just saying, none of you have
for...
skin in the game. None of you do.
Okay,
except for me.
That's you're one person. Okay,
You don't
okay,
have
fine.
a vagina, so,
Doobie,
you
you're
can't
talking-
ever speak on
I actually-
female topics again.
I actually appreciate that Doobie kind of like is highlighting the paranoia that went into this bill, because if you look at what people who have been backing this bill are saying, DeSantis saying, I don't want schools to be a playground for ideological disputes. The bill addresses sexual stuff, telling kids they may be able to pick genders and all that. Christina Pushaw calling it the anti-grooming bill. Garcia saying gay is not a permanent thing. Yeah, this bill is, people don't have no fucking idea what they're talking about. That's why they're doing this.
No, I don't.
If you've
wait, hold on,
never
but-
been
but
a
I think- I
kid,
think- okay.
if you've never been a kid, you better not fucking talk about this topic, okay? How fucking dare
Christ.
you ever think that you can talk about this if you've never been a child? Unbelievable.
Well, be quiet
Loner-
so
Loner
that
Box.
Doobie can speak because he's
Loner
only
Box,
ever
I
been a
think-
tadpole.
Oh God. So Loner Bucks, I think what's built into what you just said is the implication that this paranoia is like coming from nowhere, right? Like some of it isn't warranted and like reasonable, because there are tons of activists, LGBTQIA, whatever the fuck you want to call it, activists, who will advocate for specifically that, who will advocate for children being encouraged to question their gender identity. Right, who don't just like to go on TikTok. They'll go and make speeches at the city council and in front of legislators about this and push these bills and try to push this shit through like a law. Right, so yeah, some of the response to that is going to be paranoia. It's going to be unreasonable, but it's not coming from nowhere. There are crazy ass people on the side of this movement, right, who do push shit like this.
Okay, I agree. I'm sure they are. Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. That's why I would say it'd probably be useful to have like some kind of curriculum or some kind of lesson plan where kids are taught about this stuff in a responsible way, because I'm not like 12 years old. I don't think the state or whatever is like a boogeyman. I think like, yeah, there are some things that the education system actually does a pretty good job at. And I think actually like a reasonable lesson plan that isn't forcibly transing kids, but that also isn't like some crazy like dad who thinks like being gay makes you the devil or something. Yeah, that's
Okay,
why
so
I
think it's
this
really
bill
interesting.
is using one thing to target another thing. That's my problem.
I think it's really interesting that given how often people on this panel, some of the people that I've actually heard this before from you guys, and people in like lefty spaces on Twitch, even like right wing spaces on the internet or whatever, will shit talk the public education system, right? And their faith in it, and how all these kids come out of schools not knowing how to read and write and all this kind of shit, right? But suddenly you trust the same institution, the same fucked up system to teach fucking 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds about gender issues that adults have trouble contending with. It seems so fucking batshit crazy to
It
me.
has to be age
But I feel like
appropriate,
adults
and
handle it
I
like
actually
adults
in the room
think
with us right
I
now,
think
do
it's
you
better.
That's what I was saying.
Maybe if those adults
stuff
had been
that's gonna
taught
be
as
cool.
children, they wouldn't be so fucking brain dead today.
No,
I-
because all
I
this is up
think
for
that
debate.
it's-
It's not like a settled fucking science that you can just say, hey, this is what it is.
absolutely
I
parts
understand
of
that
it
there
are
is a
debate,
way
but there
to
are
teach.
Which part?
There is a
Wait,
way
there are
to
things-
teach children that they don't need to adhere to every stereotype and every norm, without teaching them about the complexities of gender and gender theory. There's a way to say that, sure, we can improve the curriculum in some places, but I still don't trust majority of like parents to even broach the subject with their children.
Wait, hold on.
These
So-
are important
like,
things
Wait,
to
really
be.
quickly.
a very
So
simple
why
thing is-
so rather than worry about schools reinforcing gender stereotypes, why not just have them not talk about gender issues at all when these are like 5 to 8-year-olds? Oh shit,
I'm
that's
so
what it's
curious
about.
what Top Dolphin was gonna say.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's like some really simple and like easy ways that we could talk to children about how like things happen in the world. So like an example is like children probably are gonna come across like gay people, trans people, stuff like this, straight people in the world, and saying, hey, these people exist, right? And here's some of the ways they like to be addressed, or here's some of the ways that they like to be treated. Not even being like, hey, this is something that's an option for you, but saying, hey, these are things that exist in the world. It's probably education that could probably happen and should probably happen for children at a very young age. when you talk about like educating kids in a responsible way, it doesn't be like, oh yeah, like there's some like dudes who like to fuck dudes. Like you're not telling that the third graders, but like you can have responsible conversations about the world that children engage in educational settings.
Also, Doobie, like something you said that would be like conservatives would be so against the concept, which myself too actually would be against the concept of like schools being like gender neutral. Like they're not boys and girls, they're just students. Like there's a lot of people who do advocate for like the genderless education, but conservatives push back against that heavy. They don't want genderless education.
Then hey, I guess hold on. I didn't push for genderless education. I said from 5 years old to 8 years old, you don't talk about gender norms and gender stereotypes and all this kind of shit in the classroom.
So genderless education,
which is exactly what this bill pushes.
Doobie, does that mean you're kind of like, okay, Doobie, so wait, Doobie, two questions. First of all, you probably agree that by default, kids will learn about the straight gender ideology and the het norm, like they'll just learn that by default, right?
Because that's probably what they are. Right?
Okay.
But I think we should acknowledge that there's a massive overcorrection right now in the media, right, in entertainment to represent gay and trans people. Right?
Absolutely,
so probably going to be
exposed to that.
Sure.
People saying that's not true is lying to yourself.
I just want to ask you my second question,
Doobie.
Doobie. I just want to ask you my second question. So my second question was, okay, if by default kids get the heteronormative, whatever, like default thing, then doesn't that mean if you're against the lesson plan? I don't think a lesson plan for 5 to 8 year olds when kids are already learning about straight stuff is an overcorrection, right? That would just be like equality, right?
Wait, but they're not learning about the straight stuff at school, right? They're learning it from whatever entertainment, whatever media, whatever culture they're being exposed to at home and when they're driving down the street, whatever the fuck. So if their parents choose to introduce their children to the gay character that Disney has in Beauty and the Beast or Onward or whatever the fuck else, right? That's totally the parents' decision. If they choose to show them the Lion King and explain these two lions fucking, that's totally the parents' decision, right?
You can't compare.
No,
you can't compare heteronormativity to a lesson plan. You cannot talk and just say, "Oh, well, they're learning through osmosis in the culture that men and women tend to be together, and that there's such a thing as a husband and a wife, and they may or may not, depending on how sheltered the parents are, not learn about gay relationships because apparently their parents lock them in a fucking room and don't let them ever watch TV because it's fucking everywhere anyways." But assuming that heteronormativity has this large influence, what you're talking about is lesson plans meant to combat heteronormativity. You're talking about lesson plans. Yes, don't give me that look, because we're not talking about lesson plans talking about man and wife and sex and about like what it means to be straight. None of that shit's occurring, right? So the only thing you can be talking about is trying to influence children and open their minds at a very young age to these other possibilities that we've already shown Prime K's with his own floundering adults have difficulty contending with. And it's absurd to think that that a teacher should be responsible for creating lesson plans around sexual identity and shit. If you have, let me tell you this real quick. If you have a kindergartner that's running around constantly talking about sexual identity and shit, I have concerns for that child. Because something weird is going on in their life.
Well, like a guy and a girl holding hands saying they love each other at fucking 5 years old.
You walk into a school and this kid has two dads or two moms, right? And he talks about my dad and my other dad. Like it's technically by like walking around talking about like sexuality in the school, and the thing that like teachers can't have like discussions about this is like crazy.
You're misunderstanding the bill.
This is parts of the world. No, the thing that not that only that teachers can't have discussions about this, but that teachers shouldn't be able to plan lessons to educate children about things that are in the world and that they are going to interact with. Because like, Fabian
it's fucking crazy. Teach them math and let the parents teach their fucking children before they're in third grade about the fact that Tommy has two dads.
You think we should be teaching children about like the Holocaust? I think we should be teaching like 5 and 6 year olds about the Holocaust and about the genocide in Rwanda. Like some things that people are going to learn and interact with. Yeah, some things.
Slavery. Why can't we?
Some things people are going to interact with in their lives.
We let children see violence on TV all the time. I don't see what the difference is.
Holocaust. You could probably say there was a man in Germany like a long time ago, or 50, 60, I don't even know how many years ago it was.
It's a long time
ago. There's a man in Germany who like who thought that some people were lesser than other people, and he started a war over it, and it was really bad. That's a conversation you can have for the first grader. Like, there are ways you can talk about things that, when you talk about them as adults, are really scary and might be really like graphic, but you can tone them down for children so they can understand things.
In 1941,
If you
like
want to talk about the Holocaust, you have to talk
in
about how
1941,
murdering Jews in camps is like just insane.
In 1941, some people did some things.
So,
Yes.
Lilac.
I have here's my question is, it seems like Doobie and Scott have brought up some very specific concerns. You have concerns over persuasive teaching, the use of sex toys as educational aids. Why can't you make a law that is narrow and specific instead of why does it need to be so broad? And other than just to use it as a bludgeon for anything that scares people, that says, oh, they said something that wasn't completely straight. Like, because under this law, I could see someone saying, okay, you have a story that happens to have parents, and they're a man and a woman. No one's going to complain about that. It's not going to go home. Kids are going to talk about that. But you happen to have a story where the parents are two moms or two dads, and now the kids talk about that, the parents complain, and that's a problem. Like, that's not the same as these edge cases, but this bill includes that. Why does the bill need to include that?
Because it's designed in such a way for local school boards to be able to craft policies that are more specific for their district and their community.
Why does the school board need to have such a broad policy?
Because I don't know what to say other than that's what conservatives tend to believe, is that it's better for local communities to create rules and legislation and police their own communities, and they don't like top-down authority. So conservative bills tend to be more vague because they prefer that the local school district deal with crafting the policy for what is good for their community.
Well, it's not just that. There's also the reality of, like, conservative communities don't want to teach about LGBT issues because there seems to be some overlap between learning about the existence of other options for things you can do and, like, later in life, people choosing those other options.
Yeah, it'll be easier for a Miami school, right, to have something that's less strict in the way that it drafts the policy, and like a country school way out in the boonies, right? They're going to have different communities. They're going to have different values. They're going to have different ideas of what is developmentally appropriate and what isn't developmentally appropriate.
What sucks is LGBT children are going to be in those places.
Yeah. I don't even like the framing that, like, conservative parents don't want to teach their kids about LGBTQ stuff, right? Like, they probably don't. But conservative parents want to go way farther than that, which is kind of what this bill does. They want to lock up all of sexuality in a closet, and they want to pretend it doesn't exist until their children turn 18. And then when their kid turns up at like 15 and is pregnant, they want to pretend like they're like, oh, this could never happen to my children. I don't understand what went wrong, right? They just don't want to educate children in the places that children need to be educated. And this bill is like an example. And like, I'm actually not against all of the stuff in the bill. I think there's a little bit of ambiguity with the informing parents about certain things that, like, should probably be a little bit stricter. And I don't like the blanket ban on things from K through 3. But, like, in general, I think that parents and teachers should probably communicate to parents what's happening to their children in school. In general, there's probably some edge cases.
But should I cancel my Disney Plus subscription?
Should you cancel? Yes, because
that's up
Disney
to
Plus
your
is
opinion,
not because they're too woke, but because they ruin things. They ruin good things.
I think I get the impression that you're misrepresenting the language of this bill, because a lot of this bill specifies this is the law that the local schools are required to adhere to. There's a lot of must, there's a lot of may not. Rules or laws that are put in place for school boards to develop policy that is free and of their choosing use things like they may adopt this policy, they may implement practices. These are requirements. So what it seems like will happen isn't that rural schools, Republican conservative schools are going to have the option to not teach things they don't want to, but schools that choose to teach things that the local schools make the local choice to teach about same-sex education, abuse, consent, boundaries. If they make that choice, they will be punished by this law. So it's not an open law, it's a closed one. It's restricting what people are allowed to do.
Restricted on K through 3.
We got a minute of time left.
But that's just not true.
Yeah,
I just wanted to summarize the concerns of, like, both Doobie and Scott. First of all, Doobie, I feel like you're just being really obtuse about my point when it comes to, like, the fact that cis-het kids are covered by society. That's the point. They're already covered. And that's why I'm sorry, I just don't think, you were talking about overcorrecting, right? I don't think it's overcorrecting to have like one lesson in the year about the fact that gay kids exist as well and that's cool. Like, I'm sorry, for like, that's not overcorrecting, that's just correcting.
I thought you were talking
It's
about
not because
mental.
you weren't paying
As for-
attention to
as
anything
for-
I said. If
as
that's what you
for-
think.
I
the
was, you were
response
just
was.
completely dodging my point. And
No,
anyway,
not at all.
Scott, you were saying something about combating heteronormativity. I'm sorry, like, don't be so fucking fragile. Heteronormativity is not being combated by one lesson a year about gay people. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I don't know where you came up. I don't know where you came up with this one lesson here. First off, but secondly, so what I said, right? Because you were saying, hey, they're learning cishet shit in the culture. Right? My response to that wasn't that there's an overcorrection in the school with one lesson a year. The response to that was, hey, they're also learning about gay people and about trans people and about genderqueer people if their parents choose to expose them to that media, right? Which is every fucking where. Right. And that is a massive overcorrection I'm talking about. Trans people are like, what, less than 1% of the population? Gay people are like, what, 4% of the population? But every fucking Disney remake has a gay or a trans character. Right. So the fact that so you're saying that, hey, they're learning this stuff in the culture, the cishet shit by default, and they're not learning the other shit. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe that was true 30 years ago, but right now, right, there are plenty of options out there that children are gonna interact with if they're on YouTube, if they're watching Sunday morning cartoons, if they're watching the latest Disney shit, they're gonna see gay people, they're gonna see trans people.
Is that the same as
It
long
sounds
as you
like
let them in a
it would
structured
be-
environment?
No,
but they're
I
also
totally agree with Doobie here, and I bet Fabian can probably like attest to this. Being a parent, right? I'm gonna appeal to that a little bit. Like if you talk to kids these days, they're absolutely exposed to like this stuff. Now the level of it, depending on where you live, is different. But like it like if you go like don't go into a school unless you're like volunteering or something, like that'd be weird. But if you happen to come across children and talk to children who are like even as early as like 7 or 8 or 6, they talk about this stuff. They know way more about this stuff than you or I did when we were growing up. And the fact that they're exposed to this stuff every day is even stronger argument that we should have teachers and children, like teachers having structured discussions with their children about this.
Why?
Instead of them getting their lesson from Disney, which is an entertainment platform, they can get it from an instructional
and I just don't understand
environment.
How people have so much trust in like the state, especially when the state is given express permission to hide information from parents. That's the issue this bill is doing.
What's the worst case scenario? I'm just curious.
Your kids spend how many hours a day with their teachers?
What's that?
Look,
How many hours a day
don't
do kids
understand.
spend with their teachers? Are the teachers not the guardians during that time?
Yes, but why do they have the express permission to do things with your children and not tell you? Why is that the default position? I understand.
Like you are also like in favor of creationists. Like you think that like kids shouldn't have to learn about the like the concept of planets.
What?
And the Big Bang.
Like why would I be a young Earth creationist? Like, what are you talking about?
Because this is the exact same argument parents made. Like, oh, like parents have a right to, educate the kids how they see fit. So, like, children can opt out from being in schools related to like the Big Bang or creationists, or like the concept of other planets.
What if you decide that geometry is inappropriate for your child to learn?
This is about teaching specific things to children that parents don't want versus creation. Like I'm so utterly confused.
Both of those things are things
you're comparing the idea of kindergartners being taught about sexuality and the parents not having the ability to stop it versus young Earth creationists being upset about the fact that they teach evolution in schools. You're saying those things are the same?
Yes,
because if so, it's plainly obvious that you don't have children.
You just think that one of those things are crazy and the other thing's not. But I'm saying that those things are the same. I'm saying that like
they're not the same. One is potentially abusive and harmful, and the other one's just dumb.
To add on to that,
I don't know which is which in that situation.
A child that is already going. Wait a minute, guys. To take a child that's already going to be exposed to sexuality way earlier than they can even realize, right? Because we see young people sexualized in the media every fucking day. So to take a child who's already going to be experiencing that, exposed to whatever boy band, exposed to whatever, preteen pop star that's being sexualized by the media, and then not give them some form of education at the very ages where they're going to be idolizing those people, I think is irresponsible.
I mean, it's okay for them not to understand, what it means when this chick sings like about her wet ass pussy or whatever the fuck, right? I'm okay with them not understanding, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old not understanding what the fuck that means.
16-year-old pop stars.
Okay, that's fine, right? But I don't understand like the anger over like this not being taught to 5 to 8-year-olds, right? I could understand if this was like through all the way through high school, right? But 5 to 8, they're not even going through puberty yet. They're still like a few years away from puberty.
But they still follow those
they're not even
sexualized
grappling with
pop
these things
stars.
themselves. Maybe their parents don't expose them. Maybe their parents don't expose
That's
them
not
to
the norm.
over-sexualized pop stars. I think it is the norm. I think most parents are going to
It is
show
not
their
the norm.
children.
Look at
I think
any
most parents are
Disney
gonna show
pop
their
star. Look at
5-year-olds
any female
over-sexualized
Disney
pop
pop star. They are being sexualized.
Who do you think Justin Bieber's fan base was? Justin Bieber's fan base was like.
You think his fan base was 5 to 8-year-olds?
Yes.
Little kids.
You're saying
lady killer. Like we sexualize kids from the get-go.
So we sexualize children in pop, so that's why we have to
Jake
educate
Paul.
kindergartners and first graders
were
on
the
sexual
girls looking at Jake
identity.
Paul?
There's a
sexual identity
fuck does that connect?
Right? There's a difference between teaching about like sexualization and sexual identity, right? Like teaching kids at from K through 3 that people can be gay is probably way different than teaching kids oh yeah, this is what happens when you put pop stars and exposed clothing on TV, right? We probably wouldn't have the second conversation with the K through.
Why are you guys so
I'll
concerned with teaching children who are years away from their own puberty and grappling with their own sexuality? Why are you so concerned, so convinced that you need to force this upon them and force them to have this discussion in school?
Girls
do y'all remember that
start
commercial?
puberty around the age 9 and 10. That
I'll just
some of
look at
these
this
girls are
and
starting
years after
around
what this
9
bill
and
counts for.
10, right?
But do y'all
I don't know why
I
they
don't
keep
think
making
it's.
it about,
Wait a minute. It's not an irrelevant point that maybe they should be taught a few years before then what to expect, right? It's not that crazy.
I'm just
Hey,
thinking.
I'll
I'm
that.
just
gonna give you
leave
the
it at
last
this.
word. I'm gonna give you the last word.
I'll just leave it at this, and then I'll just not talk until closing statements, and you guys can totally have the floor.
Literally 2 minutes away.
These are my. Well, I mean, it often goes late. I didn't realize it was that late, but anyways, these are my children that you think the state has the right to teach to and not inform, and that the state can teach them whatever they want, and that it's the state's responsibility to teach them right and wrong. It's the state's responsibility to give them moral instruction. It's the state's responsibility to instruct them on sexuality and everything from the most young age. And if my children happen to express an opinion that I don't agree with, or happen to express some form of identity, it's your choice. It's the state's choice what to do with my children, and they don't have to inform me at all. So here's the hard line: stay the fuck away from my children.
Got it. Now, have any of y'all seen that interesting commercial? It was a joke commercial, but it was they were using letters. It's a word with the letter L. And he was like lesbian, and they was like, it's when you like Olivia. It's like when you like someone. He's like, I like Olivia. Am I a lesbian? He's like, maybe, and she's like, I like Olivia, and then. Oh my God! Have y'all not seen this commercial? This commercial was hilarious, but it was really, it was dealing with 5-year-olds and the concept of okay, I heard this word before, I have no idea what it means, and I'm gonna ask because that's what kids do. Kids bring things up because they don't know what's inappropriate or not, and now we have to be able to deal with this somehow, and it could create an uncomfortable situation if we don't have any curriculum or plan in place for how to deal with this. And it doesn't have to be he didn't go in depth. Like he said, he's what does lesbian mean? It's when you the girl, and she was like, oh, okay, and they just went on about it, and then the next word was crack whore. But it's still a funny commercial.
Find that commercial. That sounds like a lot of fun. Okay, all right. Well,
so I just want to talk about something that Fabian said really quick, and he said that he's oh, you guys don't want parents in charge of what their children learn in school. First I want to say that absolutely parents should know what their children are learning in school. That should be something that happens. But 2, I do not want parents in control over what children learn in school, because if it was up to conservative parents, we wouldn't even teach kids about periods in like 6th grade. We wouldn't be teaching kids that condoms exist. We wouldn't be teaching kids about STDs in school. Like the education we would be getting, especially when it comes to like sex ed, would be like abstinence only education, which I am vehemently against. So yes, I don't want. And the number of parents who are against like fucking Common Core and shit like that because they couldn't understand how they were teaching the kids math. Like it's absolutely ridiculous to think parents have like the wherewithal to decide what the children can and can't learn in school. Now, should they be informed on it? Absolutely. And I think that if we were to revise this bill and make it purely on educating children, parents on like what teachers were teaching children, educating parents on what teachers were teaching their children in school. And I think there are some arguments that could be made about parents being educated on things having to do with children's emotional, mental, and health and stuff like that. If you do it correctly, I think it's like worded a little bit weirdly, but like these are things that absolutely should happen. Like if you're like having a social worker intervene with your children while they're in school, if you have to like change like the way you like treat children in school, there should probably be some intervention by either parents, or if parents aren't apt, like the state should be coming in.
I think this weird like caricature that you're making of conservative parents is like disgusting, right? I could say the same shit. Oh well, progressive parents just want your kids to learn about BDSM and spanking each other in the 5th grade. They think it's totally fine for kids to learn about using lube before they do anal at 9 years old, right? So that's a caricature. It's not real.
No,
right?
there have been court cases about creationism in schools.
Okay, and a lot of people who are pushing the creationism shit were Democrats, were religious Democrats.
Well, I didn't agree with them either.
That wasn't just Republicans, the evil Republicans that were doing this. In fact, lots of Democrats support abstinence-only education. Right, so don't stop making these fucking caricatures of conservatives and Republicans as if they're like fucking brain dead cavemen. Right, this is a very complex issue. When you boil it down, like it's so black and white, you lose all the use that could come from discussing these things.